Tonight on Primetime Politics, a high-profile departure. Former Environment Minister Steven Guilbeault quits the Carney cabinet, unwilling to accept compromises made by Ottawa in a new energy deal with Alberta. Coming up, we'll speak with the National Energy Minister Tim Hodgson about that deal and the impact of Guilbeault's departure. Plus,
they've sold out all of Canada and our future.
The Green Party leader will give us her assessment of that memorandum of understanding signed today. And
this is a really great day for Albertans.
It's a great day for Alberta. It's a great day for Canada.
We'll be joined by the Alberta Premier Danielle Smith as she talks about the road ahead with this MOU. This is Primetime Politics. Hello, everyone. I'm Michael Serapio. It's been billed as Mark Carney's grand bargain, a path to securing economic certainty by developing Canada's natural resources and honoring the country's environmental commitments at the same time. But while a big chunk of that grand bargain was unveiled today with the signing of an MOU between Ottawa and Alberta, one cabinet minister decided it wasn't worth it. Steven Guilbeault, a former environment minister in the Trudeau government, resigning his position as heritage minister today and quitting the Carney cabinet, stating he is opposed to that memorandum of understanding that would see the construction of one or more new oil pipelines and also develop capacity for carbon capture, artificial intelligence, electrical supply lines, and nuclear energy.
We look at this as the start of a process. We've created some of the necessary conditions for this to happen. But there's a lot more work to do, and very much in the spirit of partnership.
We finally have a partner in Ottawa that has recognized that the policies are unworkable, impractical, damaging to Canada, damaging to Alberta. I think this agreement is the first step in being able to correct 10 bad laws, or 9 bad laws over 10, I think, years where our economy was depressed. And it allows for us to make sure that we don't have a repeat over the next 10 years.
So high praise there from the Prime Minister and the Alberta Premier. But in resigning his position today, Steven Guilbeault also notes that the MOU walks away from some key environmental regulations set up by him and the Trudeau government. That includes abandoning an oil and gas emissions cap, suspending clean electricity regulations for Canada, and promising to amend, if required, the oil tanker moratorium along BC's northern coast. Well, with more, we're now joined by Tim Hodgson, the Minister for Energy and Natural Resources. Minister, thank you for the time.
Happy to be here. Thank you.
Listen, obviously it's not where I thought we'd begin our discussion this evening, but I am wondering how harmful Mr. Guilbeault's resignation is to you and your team. If a former cabinet colleague thinks it is too much of a compromise to move forward with this MOU, how do you convince Canadians that your government is not abandoning the environment?
So first, I just want to start by saying Steven has been a wonderful member of cabinet. He's someone I respect greatly, somebody I count as a friend. I'm sad that he's made the decision he's made. I'm pleased that he's decided to stay in caucus. I think that's great for his constituents, and I think that's great for caucus. What I also believe is we have a job to do. As the Prime Minister has said, we are in a hinge moment. We are in a moment of economic rupture. We need to deal with the reality that the entire way our economy is organized is under threat, given the trade war that has been imposed upon us. And we need to respond to that. We are responding to that by building our economy in a more sovereign and secure way. That means developing our natural resources and our critical minerals in an environmentally responsible way in partnership with provinces and First Nations. That means growing markets and bringing in new customers other than the U.S. who we've become overly dependent on. Mm-hmm. And to do that, we need the support of provinces, territories, and First Nations. And so
But
that's what we're
what
going to
about
do.
members of, and I'm sorry to interrupt, but what about members of your own caucus, though? Steven Guilbeault is walking away, and we have heard there are some Liberal MPs who are a bit hesitant, concerned about this deal moving forward with Alberta. Are you concerned that there's greater division in your party, that there's not been enough work to bring them along before you bring Canadians along?
So let me focus on what this MOU does for the environment. What this MOU does for the environment is it gets us agreement on getting a functioning carbon price in Alberta. Alberta is the biggest emitter in the country. Right now, we don't have a high functioning carbon market in that province. We now have an agreement moving forward with the province of Alberta to have a high functioning carbon market. That, as we all know, is the fastest way to get to net zero. The fastest way is to have a functioning price on carbon. We have agreement with Alberta. We will get that now. We have agreement that we will build the largest carbon capture, utilization, and storage project in the history of the world. We have agreement that for the first time, a country, Canada, will step change reduce the carbon intensity of an entire industry by building the Pathways project. That is a win for Canada. We have agreement on advancing the methane regs. We were not in agreement with Alberta before. We now have agreement with Alberta on how to do that. As our listeners know, methane is one of the most polluting greenhouse gases there is, 4 times more polluting than CO2. We have an agreement now on a cost-effective way to reduce that with Alberta. That is a win. We now have agreement on expanding the clean grid interties between Alberta and British Columbia, Alberta and Saskatchewan, hopefully into Manitoba.
All of which, Minister, all of which takes time. Do you think Canadians have the patience or are willing to give you that time? Those Canadians who essentially lent their vote to the Liberal Party, based in part, yes, on buttressing the economy, but also protecting the environment.
So we don't have a choice. We need to respond. We need to work with our provinces. We need to work with our First Nations. That's why we were elected. Our Prime Minister has said he is focused on outcomes, not how we get there. We are sharing a goal. We are sharing a goal with Alberta and with the other provinces that we will get to net zero by 2050. That goal is clear. It is a shared goal. It is laid out clearly in the MOU. How we are getting there is slightly different than we have planned in the past. But now we have agreement with the province, Alberta, an important province, on how to get there. And we're getting those same sorts of agreements with other provinces too. We now have a one project, one review agreement with the province of British Columbia. We just signed a similar agreement with the province of Ontario. We just signed a similar agreement with the province of Manitoba. We are moving forward and we are moving towards net zero. It is a slightly different path. It's a path we need to achieve. And that's what I'm focused on. I think that's what the Prime Minister is focusing on. We need to bring our caucus along on that. That's work to do. But Canadians expect us to do that hard work, and that's what we're going to do.
Part of the hard work is also British Columbia. I know you mentioned it in regards to in terms of review, but we heard from David Eby today. He is still very much against an idea of a pipeline going to the BC coast, especially in the north coast. How involved are you going to be in that job to convince him this is worthwhile and can also protect the environment?
So I know the Prime Minister's had conversations with Premier Eby. I've had conversations with my counterpart, Minister Dix. This MOU requires a proponent, in this case Alberta, to have conversations with an affected jurisdiction. The MOU specifically calls out a 3-way working table between British Columbia, Alberta, and the federal government. We will do our part. There's work to do. We're prepared to roll up our sleeves and do that work. I am flying to British Columbia tonight. I will be meeting with Premier Eby. I'll be meeting with my counterpart, Minister Dix, and I'll be meeting with Minister Parmar. And that's an important data point. 3 weeks ago, the Premier of British Columbia called us and said, we need to address the challenge in the softwood lumber industry. It's a national problem, but BC feels really affected. We want to talk about it. We didn't say, no, we don't want to talk about it. We got to talk to every person. We got on a plane. We went, we sat down with Premier Eby. We sat down with Minister Parmar. We talked about the challenges the industry was facing. We committed that we would work on solutions. And within a couple of weeks, we announced solutions for British Columbia and all of Canada. I think it's that type of engagement that gets results, and that's what we're gonna do going forward. We have some difficult work ahead of us to execute on the MOU, but we're going to roll up our sleeves and do that. One of the first steps is I'm heading to British Columbia tomorrow. I'll be meeting with the Premier. I'll be meeting with the Minister. I've offered to meet with the Coastal First Nations, and we're doing the work.
Minister Hodgson, I appreciate the time this evening. Thank you for that.
Thank you. Take care.
You too. Now, in resigning from Cabinet today over this MOU between Ottawa and Alberta, here's a bit of what Steven Guilbeault had to say, issuing a statement that reads, in part, changes in our relationship with the United States have led to profound disruptions affecting the global order, diplomatic relations, and the economy. Despite this difficult economic context, I remain one of those for whom environmental issues must remain front and center. That is why I strongly oppose the Memorandum of Understanding between the federal government and the government of Alberta. Finally, over the past few months, several elements of the climate action plan I worked on as Minister of the Environment have been or are about to be dismantled. In my view, these measures remain essential to our climate action plan. Well, let's bring in the leader of the Green Party of Canada, Elizabeth May, to the program now. Ms. May, thank you for being here.
Thank you, Michael.
Listen, I first want to get your reaction to Steven Guilbeault and his decision late this afternoon to resign from the Carney government, and while doing so, really expressing his opposition to the MOU that was signed today. What's your reaction to his resignation?
Honestly, I'm heartbroken because I know how tough this was for him. I don't know how many people in the audience would know we're old friends, and I'd, at various times wondered how he'd stuck it out with different cabinets. Like, when the Justin Trudeau Liberals were building a pipeline, I was wondering, how is Stephen standing this? I know how hard a decision this must have been for him, and all I can feel is I'm very emotional about it because this is a really tough and horrible thing for a human being to go through who'd put so much of himself into believing in that team and that this would work out. And I know that there were elements of the budget that were negotiated with me that were broken in the MOU today, which made it very hard for me. But that's nothing compared to when you're a minister in a cabinet. And I just hope Canadians will look at Steven Guilbeault and remember how we felt when Jody Wilson-Raybould showed the courage to quit the Trudeau cabinet. I think political courage, for viewers who may not have always agreed with Steven on things, but this took guts, and I really want to honor his political courage in a very tough moment today.
You mentioned the budget, and I was going to ask you about that because I wondered, given his resignation and what we saw today with the MOU, does it make you reconsider your decision to support the Carney budget just 10 days ago?
Well, no, it doesn't, because I have acted on principle throughout, and I felt that we had achieved a substantial commitment from the Prime Minister to strive to achieve the Paris Agreement. I took him at his word. I don't think it speaks well if he doesn't think his word is worth anything. And I hope that he will I don't know where we go from here. I mean, Steven Guilbeault quitting cabinet quite dashes any hope I had that the Prime Minister was serious about climate action when he made that pledge, because some of the things that are in the MOU today actually violate the budget I was able to vote for because of changes that were made in carbon capture and storage. The budget made it clear that you could not get federal subsidies for what's called enhanced oil recovery using carbon capture and storage, which is trying to shoot the carbon dioxide underground into places where it can be geologically secure and doesn't come back out to the atmosphere. That's a dicey proposition and doesn't work completely perfectly and is very expensive. All those things said, the budget made it clear that you could not get a subsidy for enhanced oil recovery, which is to say, when you take it a step further than storage and use shooting the carbon dioxide underground to loosen some of the oil that you otherwise couldn't get. So there's some very significant, although obviously smaller details that nobody really heard about in the budget. But I negotiated my vote for commitments, and obviously holding to below 2 degrees Celsius global average temperature increase, and the Paris Agreement is a critical commitment, and it's hard to know how you'd ever get there if you build more pipelines and expand more oil production.
Except that, and forgive me for jumping in, but except that the Prime Minister does make the argument, Ms. May, that in order to bring about an energy transition, Canada at the end of the day needs money to pay for the changes necessary, and oil and gas plus carbon capture is what the Prime Minister suggests is a way to get the resources in order to bring about a cleaner economy. What do you say to that?
Your word has to mean something. And when the budget specifically said there will be no subsidies for enhanced oil recovery, and 10 days later, a deal with the Alberta Premier breaks that, there's some larger questions at play here. And of course, you have to have an economy that succeeds. And we can have a decarbonized economy. We get about 3% of our GDP from oil and gas, and we need to enhance and expand our economic sovereignty, our wealth, and our ability to push back on Trump's tariffs. There's a lot we can do, and we don't depend on destroying the future for our children to get there. So I'm sorry, there's no photo op between Mark Carney and Danielle Smith that's worth my granddaughter's future, period. And we have an economy that's diversified. We need new trading partners. I'm also quite worried about the Prime Minister trying to get enhanced and expanded trade with countries like United Arab Emirates or Saudi Arabia, countries that don't respect human rights. We need to work with countries that share our values. That's a different question, but it's been disturbing. The last 10 days have had very tough moments. But I don't regret how I voted.
So can the government rely on your vote going forward? Because the budget's been accepted, but the implementation is still in the works. Are you going to vote against the implementation of the budget?
Yes, but not just because of the betrayal today. The Budget Implementation Act, I gave a speech on that on the floor of the House of Commons today. The Budget Implementation Act, as an omnibus bill at over 600 pages, has some sections with which I would agree, but if you have to vote on the whole package, there's so much there that's really worrying that separate from my vote on the Budget Implementation Act, which wasn't tabled when I voted on the Budget Implementation Act at over 600 pages, is an omnibus budget bill that is very anti-democratic at its core. Just the process of saying we're going to pass all these acts all at once and you don't get time to study them is something that is at another level altogether than the MOU.
Very quickly, running out of time. I have 30 seconds, but I want to ask you, we began with Steven Guilbeault. Will you be making a formal outreach to him to join the Green Party?
Of course. I said it. I found out he'd left cabinet while I was in the midst of a press conference virtually with the press gallery, and they asked what I would say to Steven, and I said, join the Green Party right away. Because
are you going to follow that up with a phone call tonight?
Well, I would say joining the Greens, we don't have whip votes. Any Liberal MP who feels betrayed by this, come join us. You can vote for every Liberal bill that comes. You can vote the Liberals all that you want, but stand up for climate. And if you're a BC MP, stand up for the BC coast and stand in solidarity with coastal First Nations. You can serve in Parliament and serve your constituents, and you'll get reelected.
Elizabeth May, I'm sorry I'm out of time, but thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Well, with more, we're now joined by the Alberta Premier Danielle Smith. Premier, thank you for being here.
Yeah, my pleasure, Michael.
Listen, I want to begin with a comment that you made in your news conference that this MOU essentially gives Alberta the opportunity to show the world that the solution for reducing emissions is not about capping production. There will be, people who hear that and be a bit skeptical. So walk us through how this agreement, which does include prioritizing a new pipeline, go hand in hand with carbon reduction.
Well, I can tell you that we've had a good group of companies. They call themselves the Pathways Alliance. There are 6 largest oil sands producers. And several years ago, they charted out a pathway to become carbon neutral by 2050. Part of it is carbon capture, utilization, and storage. Part of it is building interties with other provinces so that we can bring in hydropower or nuclear power. And part of it is direct air capture. And we've got 10 demonstration projects going on right now in central Alberta. But we all knew that you need enough time horizon for some of those technologies to be implemented at scale so that they can start working. And that's part of the problem that we had with the approach the federal government was taking. They were just trying to move too far, too fast, which would have resulted in our production being shut in. Now, with the agreement that we have today, I think we're going to be able to develop technology that will not only be a market on its own to export to the world, but will also be able to continue producing the heavy oil that we have that is sought after around the world.
And to that, I do also want to talk about the pipeline, because in this MOU, there's no route that's been laid out. So will that pipeline necessarily follow the path of what was the proposed Northern Gateway, or are you willing to entertain another route to the Pacific Coast?
Well, we have had a conversation with the Haisla Nation, and we have had a conversation with other nations in the Port-au-Prince, Rupert area. I think that there's lots of reasons of cost that you might want to go to Kitimat, but there's lots of good technical reasons why you'd also want to go to Port-au-Prince, Rupert. So we're looking at those as potential options. We don't want to prejudge what the outcome might be. That's what our technical assessment is going to be about. We've got all of the big pipeline companies at the table helping us to chart that, and our intention is to have a project that we can put forward to the Major Project Office for consideration by July of next year. So we're in the phase right now of engagement, which will move to more formal consultation, and ultimately Indigenous equity ownership once we identify the route that makes the most sense.
Mm-hmm. How close are you to finding a private proponent for this pipeline? Is there a company that's just been waiting in the wings for this MOU to happen?
Well, a lot closer today than we were yesterday. Part of the way pipelines get built is that you've got confidence among producers, and so when a pipeline company goes out and says, who's willing to put barrels on this pipeline, that's when they come forward. Well, our pipeline producers didn't have that confidence because they were being told that by 2030 or 2035, they'd have to shut in likely 2 million barrels a day of production. That's why removing the emissions cap was so important. That was a precondition for us getting the confidence back in the energy sector. And I suspect that there's going to be a lot of boards of directors that are doing some analysis of old projects that they want to dust off to see if they can bring them back on stream. And so that to me is the big victory we had today, is the removal of the emissions cap, the removal of the clean electricity regs applying to Alberta. And that should allow for our producers to have the confidence to attract that capital. That's what this has all been about. And once that occurs, then we have the conversation with our pipeline companies about which one or a consortium of them might come forward to build the pipeline to new Asian markets.
Okay, so a big victory in your own words there, but you know, using your own words as well, you said that this MOU represents a first step, and that trust still has to be built and earned. So with that in mind, I do wonder, was it a mistake to have moved ahead with this MOU without first engaging British Columbia and other First Nations in northern British Columbia?
Well, most of the elements of this arrangement apply to Alberta. Like the CER carve-out is for Alberta. The emissions cap on oil and gas mostly impacted Alberta. The greenwashing provisions mostly impacted our oil and gas companies. And so there's a lot of the things that are in this that really are Alberta-based. And the Pathways, a group of companies as well, that's an Alberta-based project. The issue, of course, around a bitumen pipeline, that's federal jurisdiction. That has been litigated as federal jurisdiction. Trade and Commerce Power, it's federal jurisdiction. The ports are federal jurisdiction. And so we had the right entity at the table. And now we're going to commence more formal consultation with the nations and as well with British Columbia. I've already had another call with Premier Eby yesterday so that we can talk about the areas where we agree. We're not going to agree on everything, but we do have a number of things that we can work on together with the interties, with nuclear, with ammonia, with expanded LNG infrastructure. with the expansion of the Trans Mountain pipeline capacity. So I think that there's a lot to build on from there.
Okay, I do want to ask about that phone call with Premier Eby. I'm wondering if you're starting off on the wrong foot, though, for not having engaged him earlier.
I would say I called him right off the bat when I told him that we were going to be the proponent of a pipeline project. He knew that. And in every interview I've done, I have been very transparent that I had a negotiating team, as did the federal government, that was working towards an MOU that would address the 9 bad laws, as well as the issue of the pathways and a bitumen project. So we were being very open publicly about the fact that we were doing that. And now that the federal government and Alberta has reached an agreement in principle, that's when we're going to continue in earnest to try to find that route and get more buy-in as we begin to talk with Indigenous nations about what their equity stake might be. So I feel optimistic. Obviously, anytime you have an issue, you're not going to get 100% agreement on 100% of the issues, but we've got to work through it one by one, and I'm looking forward to being able to do that now.
Okay, we will speak again. As you say, this is just the first step, but on a very busy day. Thank you for the time, Premier Smith.
Thank you.
So obviously Alberta will have some work to do on outreach, as will the Carney government. But in the Prime Minister's case, the work is now more complicated with Steven Guilbeault's resignation, something I talked about with Liberal strategist Stevie O'Brien and Conservative strategist Cole Hogan.
So I think even we saw this in the budget as well. Prime Minister Carney is a man with a vision, and he's not willing to adjust that vision for partisan reasons. He was elected during a trade war to, bring his expertise to bear on the situation. I think he's a very smart man, and I think he knows what he wants to do. I think he has not perhaps been engaging and bringing caucus along with him because he's got this vision. He knows he needs to move fast, and but it has had the result here of Minister Guilbeault stepping away from cabinet. But fortunately for Prime Minister Carney, or maybe this was part of the discussion, I don't know, he remains part of caucus. For now.
We don't know what the future holds on this one.
That's true, but for now, so it doesn't change the vote makeup in the House.
Okay, what does this say to you about the challenge of this type of MOU and what it would create for the Prime Minister, given that he has a caucus, many of whom were very supportive of the former Liberal government and their environmental focus, Cole?
Yeah, I think that's the conflict here. I think a lot of members of the Liberal caucus thought they were getting the Mark Carney, as he described himself in his book and in his previous work. Mark Carney, as part of one of his previous organizations, had talked about getting investment banks to divest from investments in oil and gas and the natural resource sector in Canada. So I think the more environmentalist wing of the Liberal Party thought that was the Mark Carney that they were going to get. Now, with this MOU and perhaps a bit of the budget, that's, more left-wing environmental part of the Liberal caucus is wondering, hey, is this exactly what we were getting when, we elected Mark Carney leader? And, apparently it was too much for Steven Guilbeault, who has decided to leave cabinet over this. And as we know, he remains in caucus, but we'll see how things move going forward and how he eventually ends up voting, because this is enough for at least one Trudeau-era minister to say, this is too much of a far cry from the Trudeau Liberal governance, and we'll see where we want to take it from there.
Mm-hmm. Did you want to say something more?
This is definitely not Trudeau's Liberal Party anymore. I think you can see that on some of the environmental pieces and also on the consultation pieces. Trudeau perhaps consulted and talked too much, and maybe Prime Minister Carney could go a little bit farther in that way. But it is a trade war. He did say that he was going to do these things. He needs to double non-U.S. trade and create an energy superpower. And I'm not quite sure how you can do either of those things without working with Alberta on a solution.
Strategist Stevie O'Brien and Cole Hogan. You can see the full discussion on our CPAC website and on our YouTube channel. Well, that is Primetime Politics for this evening. I'm Michael Serapio. Primetime Politics is back tomorrow night, and until then, do take care.